All right, folks, I'm going to walk you through how I have my 2024 NuCanoe Unlimited rigged up for kayak catfishing. So the NuCanoe Unlimited is great because it is 41 inches wide and it only weighs, I think, 87 pounds. For how light it is, with 41 inches wide, you cannot beat the stability of these things. And at least with a motor, paddling's a different story, but with a motor, they're not that much slower than anything else out there, if at all. With this 70-pound trolling motor on there, I mean, I can cruise along at 5.5 miles an hour a lot of times. And then this tarpon drainage system that they come up with for these things is just amazing. I mean, I've had so much water come crashing up over the bow, and it's never been a problem for me. Next up, we'll talk about the rod holders. I think it's important to have a solid base underneath whatever kind of rod holder it is you use. If you don't have a good base underneath your rod holder, it doesn't matter how good or how strong that rod holder is. If it gets ripped off the side of the kayak because it wasn't secured properly to a strong enough base, the rod holder does you no good. For my NuCanoe Unlimited, and you have to kind of tailor each of these to the specific kayak that you're in. For my NuCanoe Unlimited, I ordered some of that HDPE board, and I traced out the curvature of the gunnel there so that it matched to it, and made it long enough to come over directly over top of the tracks. And then this base piece here to it that sits on the track, this is from an old NuCanoe Pinnacle chair that I no longer use, because the Fusion 360 chair is just awesome. Drilled 4 holes in that board, ran a regular bolt through here, attached it with these NuCanoe knobs, T-bolt right through here, attaches that to the track on each side, and then another T-bolt here and here. Now it was, since these are a little taller, I did have to have a spacer in here on this side. This YakAttack Sidewinder that I use to wrap up my excess live scope cord acts as a spacer that keeps this level. Tighten it all down, and that thing has just made a rock solid base. Initially I had the rod holder bases, attached them directly to that, but then I had the idea of getting the 6-inch catch T-tracks that they make and putting that on there, and that would allow me to have some customizability of where exactly the rod holders sat. Now initially when I was using the YakAttack Omega rod holders, that worked. Once I switched over to the Stealth rod holders, just because of the base of how long it is, it takes up the entirety of that track, so I don't have that ability to shift it left and right, which is fine. Initially I was using the YakAttack Omega rod holders for catfishing. They work just fine, there's no problem with them. But the reason I have switched to the Stealth rod holders, the Omega rod holders, the opening on top of them where your rod handle goes in is, one, it's narrower. And so a lot of times, you're already fighting the catfish to get the rod out of the rod holder, but then you have to fight to squeeze your rod handle out of that narrow opening. It just got to be a pain. And I know I've seen Jesse O'Neill use these Stealth rod holders in his catfishing. Go look at any of his social media. I mean, he catches tanks. So confident that these rod holders can take the punishment of a larger catfish. Another thing that I like about them that I don't like about any of the other rod holders, they have this grip function right here that when you put your rod in there, it clamps down around the handle. And now the weight of your reel, oh, hang on folks, I got to take this. No, never mind. These fish keep teasing me. So what that does, it prevents the weight of the reel from flipping the rod over. But also it has, you're able to see it, there's padding underneath here that keeps the foam on your rod handle from getting chewed up. So I like that feature of it as well. And then just on top of that, the entire rod holder, the extension arm, the base of it all is just rock solid. Now over here, the NuCanoe Unlimited comes with these 2 molded in tackle storage areas next to your seat on each side. And I use that when I'm catfishing to hold my bait knife, and then the cutting board I use for cutting up my bait. And then on this side, I keep a pair of scissors I sometimes use to trim the bait up, but then also I use one of these Cast King 3600 boxes, and it's simple tackle for catfishing. Got my sinkers, some 12-aught hooks, rattle float, some barrel swivels, some dragon weights, and that's all you need. Now up here by the rod bases on each side, I have this magnetic attachment that holds these gloves that I use for landing catfish. By using this magnetic attachment, I'm able to easily tuck my rod up under my arm and then get my free hand out, and this easily breaks away, and then I keep it loose and open, and I just slip my hand in there. I'm able to get it on quickly and land my catfish, no problem. And I have one on each side. Now, as far as my graphs go, I got two 93 SVs set up here on top of my gear pod. I won't go in depth with what is inside the gear pod and how it's set up. I have a whole video dedicated to that. I will also link that down in the description, but I will talk about how I have these 93 SVs mounted up on here, because it's different than what I previously had been running. I used to have the Yak Attack sonar screen mounts, and it had the monitors sitting up probably that high, and I really didn't feel like I was getting any benefit from having it up that high, but it just created a risk of hang-ups, either on casting or, you know, you're landing a fish and just one more thing. You know, this is still possible with how I have it now, but it's a lot more low profile. And what I did is just drilled an extra hole in the mount that comes with the graphs to allow me to put two T-bolts on it, and just attached it to the T-track that's on the top of the gear pod. Now for my side imaging and my down imaging, I have the GT54 transducer. I think that's the older model of transducer. I have that on Yak Attack's Switchblade transducer mount. And then as far as my live scope, I have the LV32, the older of the two live scope transducers. Works fine for my purposes. And yes, I do use it for catfishing. I know that will probably set the internet on fire with rage, but I don't use it in the way that sounds. I don't use it to go look, oh, hey, I think that's a catfish. What I do use it for is to precisely place my bait where I want it. So you drop it to the bottom, and everybody knows the technique of, you know, you drop your baits to the bottom, and then you reel your rod tip down to the water, and then you pick it up and you put it in the rod holder. You can guesstimate about how far your bait is off of the bottom, but you get into current and it's a little harder to guesstimate that. And so I use the live scope to find my bait, and then I put it wherever I want it. And then the other, probably more important use of it for me is whenever I am drifting or dragging baits for catfish, there's always the risk of getting hung up, snagged on something. And so what I do use it for is, as I'm trolling along, using that iPilot function, putting it on autopilot mode, I can let the trolling motor do the driving, and then I can watch my lines and use the live scope to kind of scan slowly back and forth as I'm moving along and look for any potential snags or hangups. Because I can't tell you how many times before I started doing this, you know, I've run into a brush pile or gotten hung up on a sudden outcropping of rocks. It's just frustrating. It's a waste of your tackle. And so I found that doing this with the live scope is helpful to avoid those snags and hangups. Starting with the live scope pole that I have my transducer mounted on, and I have that attached to I think they're called the Quick Tracks, but I modified it a little bit. I cut off the ends right here, drilled a hole through what was left of the arm, drilled a hole through this plate, and then put a long T-bolt through there, and then clamped it down. And that has allowed me to have my live scope right next to me versus the T-tracks that are on the gunnel. You can still do that, they're just, it's a little further in front of me than I want. I like it right here next to me. And then kind of made my own DIY cradle for the live scope pole to rest in when either, you know, I'm traveling down the road or running from spot to spot. And it just goes in there and gets strapped down. And that's a Railblazer, I think it's a transducer pole holder thing, I can't remember what it's actually called, with a Railblazer base, and this is the Yak Gadget sidearm, I believe. And like I said, if you want to know any more about how I have either my live scope set up or inside my gearbox set up, I have a couple videos on that. I will link those in the description, make it easier to find. Next up is my measuring board for catfish. I used to use the Musky Bumper measuring board, and it works great. You have to get a piece of aluminum from like Lowe's or Home Depot in order to be able to lock it out so that it doesn't fold in half whenever you sit it up on the gunnels of your kayak when you're measuring a fish. But aside from that, it works fine. It floats. Catch came out with the big game board, 64 inches. It's blue like my measuring board for my bass fishing tournaments that I use. I'm a weirdo and like things matching. Can blame that on 20 years in the Army. But also being a metal machined measuring board, there's no flex, there's no give. You throw a big catfish up on there, that thing is rock solid. I like that. Similar to the regular bass fishing catch measuring boards, it cups the fish and holds them versus the flat board of the musky bumper. Next up, we'll talk about the motor that I have on this thing. It is a 70-pound, 24-volt Minn Kota power drive with all the iPilot features. Aside from the speed advantages that the 70-pound thrust gives you, having the ability to spot lock instead of having an anchor and potentially get hung up, being able to just spot lock is one, way faster, way more convenient, but also a good bit safer, especially when you're out here. If there's any kind of moderate current, anchoring can be a risky maneuver. And I have that mounted on my own DIY bow mount plate that it's about 1 inch thick. I ordered a piece of HDPE, that high density polyethylene off of Amazon, and got myself a jigsaw and a sander and cut myself the shape that I wanted for it, and also cut out some slots so that I could have handles for it. And empowering that motor is the 24-volt, 50 amp hour lithium battery from the folks at Redato. It's the one with the Bluetooth capability, and that has just been amazing because you can have the confidence when making decisions on how far to run up the river, down the river, across the lake, and know how much juice you got left in the tank. The other day I was out on Kentucky Lake for 6 or 7 hours, and by the end of the day it was sitting at 30 amp hours is what was left in it, so plenty of charge left. And I spend most of the time that I'm catfishing on spot lock, so I don't have an anchor trolley set up on my kayak anymore. I used to run one. If you do want to run an anchor trolley, because you don't have to have the iPilot. If you want to run an anchor trolley, I have a video where I talk about how I made a no drilling, no holes in the kayak anchor trolley, and I will link that down in the description if you want to go take a look at it and see how to make it yourself. Underneath my seat I have the YakAttack short stack for storage, because when catfishing I don't carry my black pack because I have a cooler there holding my bait. And so this thing has been super convenient. It just pulls out, and keep gloves in there for when I'm cutting up my bait, spare gloves for when it's cold. I got extra leader line in case I got to tie a new one on, extra set of sunglasses, whatever else it is you want to keep in here. These heat packs. It's just a nice place to be able to secure any gear that you might have with you. If you want to put your phone there, I keep mine in YakAttack's Roto Grip phone holder, and by far my favorite phone holder for my kayak. I even put one in my truck. Now, switching around to the back of the kayak, I have the Yeti Brody 24 cooler. One, because it's orange and I like things matching, orange and blue if you haven't noticed. And no, I'm not a Florida Gators fan. But one, it fits. I was trying out different coolers to see which one fit back in this space I have in the NuCanoe. And I did find some cheaper coolers that do fit, but for one reason or another, falling apart, not holding up to any wear and tear. I lost the lid on one driving down the road. I didn't want to keep buying cheap coolers, so I went ahead and coughed up the money and got a Yeti. Seems a lot more durable. I like that it has the latches on the lid to lock it closed, and it works really good keeping the bait cool. And then for rod storage, when I'm running down the river before I have them out in the rod holders for fishing, I use these YakAttack AR tubes. And just had to put an extension arm on them and they work great. I just need 4 of them. And then back behind that is where I keep my battery. Have it secured with some straps, and then on the back there to help this thing track straight is the NuCanoe rudder, even though I have it locked stationary, so technically it's actually a skeg. I have that Yeti cooler attached using YakAttack's 3-foot cam straps, and so I'm able to have it on the back of the kayak driving down the road, and it's not going anywhere. So, and that's my setup for catfishing. Please, if you have any things that you do differently that you think would be better, please comment. I'd love to hear about it and implement it if it works for my setup. And as always, thanks for watching.